Hello, Compassion Ambassadors. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is a very important conversation, a little bit provocative even, and I believe probably one of the most important conversations that we can be having with ourselves and with each other. I'm here with my dear friend, Theo Kyriakos, and hi Theo, he's a transpersonal psychotherapist. He is incredibly skilled at working with the shadow, the darker aspects of self. And Theo has really been showing up for me over this last year, really weekly, meeting with me via FaceTime to support me in this, this process that I've been going through with facing the darker side of my experience with neurological Lyme disease and neuroinflammatory episodes that have been not only incredibly painful, they've been, striking a pretty deep chord of panic, as well as unearthing some deep trauma that, quite frankly, I would love to believe is just behind me. So why does that happen, Theo? Why do we think we're over our trauma and then boom, there it is?
I wish I knew, but what I do know is that sometimes the big experiences in our lives become like guides for our further development. So we have to revisit them in different phases of our lives. So it's not always the same when we revisit an experience, but they seem to become like I wouldn't say compass, but it's something like the steady point from which we work and we unfold,
Mm-hmm. I've been really struck by your ability to just be very steady and neutral, no matter how panicked I am when I show up for our phone calls. Yeah. Thank God you live all the way in Greece, because I think you probably would have, smacked me around a few times just to get me to, to just relax. But tell me a little bit about your training and how you've come to be able to navigate these things.
Have many different trainings, but the main one is a transpersonal psychotherapy. I have a master's in transpersonal psychotherapy, which it was quite an integrative kind of training. It uses a lot of Jungian practices like active imagination, creative expression, and also mindfulness and somatic psychotherapy, which is a psychotherapy that connects you with your body and process feelings through the body. It also includes a lot of other modalities, even cognitive behavioral and Gestalt and like a lot of modalities. So I was fortunate enough to train in London in an amazing institute. It's called CCPE. And the teacher there was also, he started as a scientist back in his days, like a physicist. Then he moved into psychotherapy, and also he became the head of the Sufi order. He's a very inspiring and very humble teacher. It's not someone who you will see in social media or anything like that. And so he created that training. So it has a lot of, like we also taught as a developmental map, let's say, or model, the Western alchemical model, which Jung also studied in his time. And it kind of, transpersonal psychotherapy kind of accepts the notions of spirituality. Doesn't mean that you're going to communicate that to the client, but it's a non-pathological model. It sees the person in a journey, and the difficulties we're facing in the journey is only as, how to say, maybe even seeds to our unfoldment, So it looks at the individual as a soul in a process, like in an incarnated body, and in a process of self-unfolding or self-awakening or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. Then I have other trainings as well, because I train with him in mindfulness and in through the Sufi tradition, in isolation for days or weeks at a time. So it was interesting how those experiences can be supportive to the psychological process that one goes through. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate enough because my spiritual guys were also psychologists, psychotherapists, and the psychotherapists also had an open mind about spirituality, which I think the two together work very well, you know.
Well, I do know because I've lived a really deep personal experience of that. I'm just now starting to publicly talk about the darker side of my life, the side that I never, ever, ever wanted to have to talk about ever again. But now it's really become clear, and through the experience I'm having now, and it, that in in service to the world and service to the benefit of all beings, I need to speak openly about this experience with neurological Lyme disease, and also with PTSD, and the way that it has impacted my life. Like I said, I really realized yesterday that, since age 14, which was the age that I first knew that I wanted to commit suicide, um, when I tried to commit suicide, and the guns that I went to get to go through with my plan were not there, my life plan changed. At that point, I decided to be a survivor, and I decided to run away from home and start looking for help. And what I realized is I've been really running and looking for help since then. And part of that looked like rising above and overcoming, creating a very normal, beautiful life that was separate from the traumas that I experienced pre-age 14. From age 14 on, I had more normal traumas. Being a teenager, and going through the things that you go through, in college and whatnot. But prior to age 14, there were really horrific things that happened to me. And I really wanted to just sort of leave them behind. I felt like they claimed the best of me. And I really wanted to say, no, 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 you didn't get me. I'm going to have an amazing life anyways. And I was really successful with that until about age 26, when I suddenly came down with a mysterious illness that hospitalized me for 2 weeks and then kept me in bed for almost 3 years. At the time, I was told I had meningitis and encephalitis and severe PTSD. At that point in time, I had no other choice but to um, dive into what you're talking about, which was a relationship with my spirit. And I was sort of on the cusp when these things happened to me in my, I guess it was my late 20s. And in the beginning, I was very much in the allopathic and pathological model that you were talking about. And they put a lot of labels on me and gave me a lot of medications, and none of them worked. And what I found through my own experience was that none of those judgments were actually ever even accurate. And so thankfully, I leaned into my spirituality, and I came across I've come across some of the most amazing spiritual teachers. I've been deeply dedicated to my spiritual work, and it has been the stabilizing force in my life. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to people like you, Theo, who understand that we are complex and dynamic beings, that we're just as much spiritual as we are physical, and that it's the relationship and the evolution of the relationship between the two that leads to our true healing. So because when I was trying to work with people who didn't have the understanding that you have, that it was like there was this massive gap and I couldn't be met, and they couldn't figure out why none of the medications they were giving me weren't working. So it was when I made the switch to integrative medicine, to my spiritual evolution and practices, to transpersonal and somatic psychology, to things like somatic experiencing. I've been, having been supported by miraculous healers coming into my life all the time, probably because I'm constantly on my knees praying for support. So they come through in angels, like how Theo has.
It's the praying, but in the end of the day, is the action. It's you reach out and someone reaches back. So.
And then the work begins.
Remember that.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and then the work begins. I'm glad you said that, because I met with someone over the last weekend. She took me to tea on Easter, and she's realizing she has PTSD for different reasons than I have. And she's like, I just want to like plug into something and like get through it, have it be gone, and then like move on with my life. I was like, she's like, have you found anything like that? I was like, oh yeah, no, I haven't found that one yet. I mean,
Yeah.
trauma work, showing up for your trauma work, showing up for true healing. What I believe, my favorite definition of healing is the process of becoming whole. It's radical. Can you say a little bit about that? Like what it really takes, that, you're answering the call, then I have to answer back, then the work begins.
Yeah. What can I say about that? I mean, it's a dance. It's a call and a response. And you mentioned that sometimes you felt you weren't heard, or in the beginning. It's interesting how each professional is trained in a modality, and they have their own belief system. And when they're facing something that is a little bit more difficult, or a little bit more difficult to comprehend, or more to the, we don't have all the variables to assess it, let's say, there is a tendency that there's a bias that we're going to try to fit it in our own model, or paradigm. And also with therapists, sometimes like a therapist or a healer goes into the profession to hopefully to help others. So one of the biggest motivators for a healer is usually to help others. And that can get you an awkward dynamic, because you can get into the dynamic of the savior with the victim. So the therapist also has to do a lot of work. So that meeting, that coming together is kind of, it's empowering the other person, and it doesn't make the other person dependent, or pushes the person further into victimhood. Not in a conscious way, but in a very, like, the outlook can be really nice. I'm here to help you and whatever, and then the doctor forgets to really listen to the patient, or the therapist really forgets to really listen to what the person is saying. I want to just fit them in their own reality, take you from your reality, from your system of beliefs, and put you into mine. And same, the doctor can do that. A doctor has studied many, many years. So when someone tells them something that doesn't fit into their model of thinking, the tendency is to dismiss it as though, well, the patient doesn't know, I'm the expert. So I don't know if you have faced that with medical. Yeah. So
medical and also with therapists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's not like, let's say your interpretation may be right or wrong of what you're describing, but what you're describing is your experience, and it's valid. You see what I'm saying? So it really needs, it's not all compassion, what I'm talking about. It's also scientific way of thinking. It's like the skeptical way of thinking, It's just you're trying to discern which information is actual experience and which information is actually interpretation of experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, isn't it all interpretation of experience? I mean, aren't we all just...
Yeah, yes and no. Because if you tell me you have a pain there, I know you have a pain there.
Yeah.
And if you tell me that after you gave me that shot, I felt like this, or I felt like that, or after you did this intervention, I felt like this, or I felt like, I had to hear your experience,
Mm-hmm.
And the experience can be physical, it can be emotional. Like if you feel something when we are doing something, the feeling is real. Why the feeling is there, it's a different, like that's where the interpretation comes.
Mm-hmm. That, and I think what's really interesting, and this is something that came up with us because it was coming up in one of my friendships, is that one really key thing about meeting someone where they are and their experience is that, you cannot force anyone to heal from anything. You cannot say, that's your trauma. You have to heal that. I'm going to push you through this healing.
I know what you're referring to right now.
Right? Like, really. Is that the worst thing you could ever...
You might be tempted as a healer to do that.
Right.
Because you feel the pain too. You may be even empathetic, and you say, oh my God, this is it. This is it. Get out. Yeah,
let's get through it. Tomorrow, I'm going to now pedal to the metal, push you through. It's okay. Unfortunately doesn't work like that.
Here's the fun thing of that. This is like a right brain thinking, like not right brain. It's will. It's right side thinking, like the male side.
Yep.
Male, female. I'm not talking men, women. It's the will, and it doesn't take into consideration process.
Right.
Because yes, you might need to go from here, and I can see that because I have seen it 10,000 times, for example. Okay,
yeah.
But you need to go from here. It is not like a jump.
Right. Like the healing is in the process.
The destination is an outcome of the journey, let's say. It's not just, oh, we know where you should be. Okay, I'll take you from here. You know how easy therapy will be if that was true? It's
Can you imagine?
I'm a compulsive smoker. Okay. You need to stop, okay? Okay, thank you, doctor. Bye-bye. And that's it.
I wish it was that easy. Sometimes I talk to myself like it's supposed to be that easy. You know, luckily, because of the phenomenal support I've had for all these years, and even in my childhood, I've been in talk therapy since I was 8 years old. You know, I've had thankfully, I have access to sanity. So I can see a lot of times my own stuff as if I was my own therapist, but I still don't get to do the whole, okay, I see it now, change it, you know, which is interesting when we get into what is happening a lot in our spiritual communities and our new age sort of isms that are true, but they're overly generalized in the media, like you create your own reality and
please
just just control your thoughts and everything will be different, or if you're sick you just need to change your mind. And I want to say yes, and A-N-D, capital letters, very big, very long, it's part of. Do you want to say something about that?
Okay, so yes, some of them aphorisms are not even correct, you know. That is pseudoscience, or it's not part of people are so fascinated about creating their own reality that they forget that the creation, and like when we create, because I'm going to disappoint some people here, we are not gods or goddesses. It's a co-creative process, like we're using resources, so that resources be human, maybe planetary. We are not if a person thinks I'm creating by myself, it's not realistic, you know. Yes, you're affecting what you're creating, but you also affect them from the system you're living, maybe that the economy or the planet or your community or whatever. And you have, you know, there is yes, we can change the way we experience reality by and hopefully we'll do that in a realistic way, and we just don't create a bubble to avoid like dealing with issues and looking away from issues. But let's say when you're working to create something, first of all, there's a thank you. I think I have mentioned this to you. There's a thank you in Japanese. When you say thank you to someone, like you bring me coffee and say thank you, Heather. And I mean thank you. Thank everybody that was before you that helped you be here right now in front of me. Help all the people that grew the coffee, or, you know, you helping the ancestors, you helping all the people behind you bringing me a coffee, you know. And we kind of forget that this is like, we're not so independent, like we don't live as a singularity, like, and the push of the self-empowerment, I think one of the biggest out of the self-empowerment movement is that it forgets that the individual is a system by itself, but it lives within other systems, and it's interdependent on these systems. Like the biggest madness I say sometimes is like we forget how interdependent we are from these systems. Like we breathe in the air, we drink in the water, we eat the food, we excrete back. So it's like a full circle with the planet, and we consider the planet separate than us, something like we can abuse or use for our own personal material abundance or prosperity or whatever. It's not, you know, it's part of our system. It is one, you know, even if you look at it from a scientific perspective, not a spiritual perspective. We're interacting, we're breathing its air, we're eating its food. Like, it's madness to think that we're separate.
Julia Butterfly Hill talks about this. I just saw a video with her where she was talking very much about this, and very much about how her relationship with the earth is one of her healers, and that she literally, when she knows that she has things, traumas or things, grief to discharge, she literally then goes to her favorite places in nature and communes with the nature and asks for permission, very much like the Native American, traditions, honoring the rock fathers and so forth. You're just realizing that we are all living beings, co-creating and in relationship. And so the thing after, a lifetime of therapy, 20 years of intensive work internally and privately with my trauma and with illness in my body, which of course trauma and disease, they go together. I think that trauma magnifies and becomes a magnet for disease. And that's why I work with it so deeply, because I want freedom from both these things. And one of the things that I'm realizing is that in creating my reality, if we want to call it that, it's really a co-creation. What I'm most responsible for is my internal landscape or hygiene, and working towards a place of resonance. Knowing when I'm in discord versus resonance doesn't mean you're never going to be in discord, because there is the dark, but also then having a resonant relationship with the discord, which brings us to the whole point of the call. I'm calling this meeting suicide. And there's so much that we can be talking about. And really, when we really get down to the darkest of the dark, this last couple of weeks in my treatment, the treatment that was provoking not only the pathogens and flushing my brain with neurotoxins, what came up at the same time was deep-seated trauma, that ultimately was the realization that there's been a part of me that has been deeply suicidal for a very long time. And in my way that I like to control things with my mind, and all of my ways that I love to do positive thinking, I love to clean up my vibration, I love to reach for the path of the light. I have all these practices. They're all valuable. But the point that we're making is that they don't stand alone, and that total denial of the darkest parts of myself, I tried that. It didn't work. I just ended up getting the rug pulled out from underneath me, by my body breaking down, my nervous system breaking down, and it's happened more than once. So what happened was that I have been aware that I have had suicidal thoughts most of my life, but I also have a very strong will to live. And I've focused all my attention on creating a bodacious life, which is how I got myself out of bed the first time I got sick 20 years ago. And I just one step at a time started creating a bodacious life. And really that was inspired by my dog, Bodacious, who was my companion at the time. My husband was working nonstop and doing everything to take care of everything in our world so that I could heal. And so I started realizing that my dog was pretty happy, and that if I had a life like his, everything would be okay. So I started emulating him. And anytime I felt lost or scared, I would just look at him and say, Bodes, what would you do? And my ex-husband and I had this whole thing we called the Bode life, the bodacious life, the Bode life. And we even, once I got well, one of the first times, even launched a yoga brand and yoga studio at school, all around this philosophy. It's my guiding principle for my life. My dog has passed, but he's always with me. So one of the things that people didn't realize was how hard I was working to polarize away from the suicidal thoughts, from the pain that was in my body, from the disease and the illness that was in my body. And at that time, the way out was to deny and rise above. And then anytime I felt it coming to the surface, I had all my practices. So, and then I also had my whole integrative medicine team that I was just pouring cash out to on a regular basis. It's like kind of driving a beautiful car with tires that are constantly going flat. So as long as I was always propping from all these corners and working spiritually from all these ways, then I actually created a life that doctors told me I would never live. And I'm really proud of that. And now I'm learning the dark is always there. And what I thought were suicidal thoughts, I realized last week was full-blown feeling suicidal. And we had a really powerful call. And I also work with another transpersonal psychologist who is also does a lot more somatic work. And so the two together, I'm being incredibly supported through this process. And that's why I know it's time to talk about it, because I know I'm not the only one. So it really broke my heart to realize that there is, and I have to still keep it a little bit separate from me, because obviously I have a strong will to live and I'm choosing to live. I'm also very aware that there's a part of my consciousness that, is suicidal. It's not just thoughts. And what I realize is that part of myself then becomes very weighty, becomes a magnet for the disease. And the reason why I'm shining the light on it, talking about it, exposing it, making sure I'm talking with my friends about it, making sure I'm talking with my therapist about it, is because it's time. That I have been dragging that around. Really, we located it was the 6-year-old little girl when the severe physical trauma really was happening. That not only was suicidal, but was barely living. Almost cut off completely from life. So that's a lot for me to share. Even though this is just a recording, I know that it's going to be shared, and I'm kind of pouring sweat right now. But I know, all these things I've been ashamed of all my life, it's time to talk about them. This isn't about me. This is about what we as a collective go through on our journey to becoming whole, what our experience is as humans on this planet, and how we're impacted by the experiences that we have in our life, and a lot of my trauma wasn't even intentional. It was just people being just consumed in their own grief and pain, lashing out. So I could go on and on because there's a lot to share about it, but I feel like I set the stage. How do we meet suicide?
So many different threads I can follow from this, but I think I'm just going to go talk about suicidal ideation, and I'm going to talk about it in a more general way, because I don't want to enter into the specifics of your case.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting, like you use words like it's a way to get out. So it calls for a change, like someone is unbearable, something, the individual is trying to get out of the situation. Now, I'm aware this is just like a few minute call, but I just want to say what I start sometimes the conversation with that, just reminding people that we have, let's say, different levels of existence. So we have the one that is the physical one. And I'm not saying these are the only two levels of existence. I'm just making a separation just for the sake of the conversation and to create like a different perspective of what we are looking at. So we have the actual physical world, that we have laws that govern this world. Like if you go outside and jump out of the second floor or third floor, you're gonna at best get injured or even die as you hit the ground. And that's a physical thing, that body can only sustain that much of impact or hit. Now, if you're imagining that you want to die, though, and you want to jump, and you say, I feel like jumping out of the window. If you sit in meditation and you imagine you're going in the, 40th floor in your imagination, and you're jumping off the window, you're not going to die physically. You're going to go through a process of experiencing something. So it might feel like sometimes like we forget to separate the two words. So let's say your body, even in your body that is going through a lot, and it's not in
Sorry, someone was just coming. Go ahead.
No worries. So even your body that is going through a lot, that has to do with a lot of physical trauma, mm-hmm. and chemical trauma as well. So even your body that's going through a lot is not in dying. It's not dying. Okay, so it's alive.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said there's suicidal ideation, which means something in you wants to die.
Yeah.
Something is calling you to die. So when you said you were 14, you were very clearly saying, I wanted to get out. So it clears that the thing that it's like, it's fed up. It's like there is an impossibility of, I don't know how else to change the situation. So it's lack of resources or ways to change the situation. And says that's the only thing I can think of to get out of this torturous situation.
Right.
And it is a difficult planet. I mean, you had a very difficult experience, but there's so many people that have difficult experience in so many different levels. It's not an easy planet.
Mm-hmm.
So the life on Earth, it has a lot of challenges. So sometimes it gets to the point that we want to break. Are we exhausted or we want? And the confusion gets then, or it's the confusion because there's also the physicality of it. Like they couldn't get out, You didn't have any people to actually help you. The carers weren't there for their own reasons. I'm not trying to put a judgment,
Mm-hmm.
but for their own reasons, they couldn't see what was happening, or they couldn't engage with what was happening to help you out. So you were on the dead end, and you were like feeling like, and then you're saying, now I still have this kind of suicidal part of me. So there's still a part in you that asks for death. Now, I'll give you, like, for me, it's an error in thinking if someone takes the thing that they're feeling internally as an action that they, like the self that inside that wants to die. And you're lucky, you also lucky. You have the option that you say, I also have the thing that I want to live. So you're aware of the two parts. There can be a person that has no connection with the part that wants to live. It makes it even darker.
Right.
It's even dark because there's nothing to hold on to, nothing. And you might have been through a period that there was nothing to hold on. There was, when you were 14, maybe you didn't have the thing inside of that rose later that wanted to live, that wanted to fight, that could fight,
Yep.
So, and then someone takes their life, so says, I feel that, and they take their life. So I don't know what happens after death, and I don't want to contemplate what happens after death. I don't want to call committing suicide a name or another name. Let's call it is what it is. But
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't belong to the actual situation on that moment. What you need is to get out of that situation. You don't have any options, and then you're thinking of like, oh, I have to commit suicide. So we confuse the inner world and how the imagery is presented in the inner world with the outer world. So the body is healthy, and the person kills themselves because they don't have, like we even see people killing themselves because they lost money, and we have serious reasons. Sometimes people attempt suicide, they sometimes succeed. Other times that they're not even serious, that you look at it in retrospect and say, thank God I didn't do it.
Mm.
So the first thing I want to say to anybody that is listening to this video, it's first of all, the feelings are very real. The darkness is very real when you face it within. And then what we do is we project it in the outer world. And then we take an action to fulfill that inner movement. The inner movement is wants to be engaged. Doesn't mean the only way to engage it is by actually taking a physical action and jumping off the window, for example. I'm just using jumping off the windows in an example. So a lot of the shadow work and the mindfulness somatic psychotherapy that you mentioned, what it teaches the individual is to go into that death place and teaches the individual to go through the death process within and surrender to surrender resistance, because there's a resistance when there's when we're facing intense situation inwardly, there is the opposing forces. So a lot of the spiritual traditions as well, way before psychotherapy was developed, they're talking about practices that you feed your body to your demons, or you call in your demons and you willingly feed your body, metaphorically speaking. Nobody cuts a piece of their finger and gives it to, even the practitioners that go in the cemeteries and they have different unusual experiences, and even they can even see sometimes the demons appearing that they're calling in with certain practices, and then they're willingly offering the body. It's an act of surrendering within.
Yes.
It's an act of offering yourself to what you're frightened of. Nobody cuts, in no practice I know of, nobody cuts a finger and gives it to an actual demon, and the demon takes it and chews it and then says, I can have another one, and it's the other one, until that doesn't happen. So it's a process that happens in the Christian tradition, for example, in the Buddhist tradition and the Hindu tradition, there are some practices that they work like that. They even do it with skull bones from humans that have their Buddhists that have offered their bones for these tools. So they amplify the situation with different mantras, with different practices, rituals, to experience it more intensely, let's say. And I'm not saying this is the only, like, I'm just giving one explanation, okay? So, and they'll teach themselves to go through these death rites. And that's what the most important that the person needs to be taught when they're going through a suicidal ideation, for me, is how to go through the death rite inside themselves. And there can be, you can also add ritual to it. There are a lot of rituals that happen in shamanic traditions, like you bury yourself for a day or 2 days, you dig your own grave, and you go in and you don't put soil, like you put plank, you can breathe inside, okay? And you go through that with the earth, and or you can do it, there are so many different ways to do death rites through visualization as well. So what are these doing is they teach the person to go through this intense emotional experience, because even wanting to be suicidal is an intense emotional experience. And again, it's a huge subject, like me talking, because they're different, then all cases are the same.
Yeah.
But what is true in all cases is like there is an inner experience, and then it's taken outward without the body dying. I'm not talking about euthanasia, like someone wants to be died because they're terminally ill and they're in pain and stuff like that. We're talking about someone suiciding because too much the pain to bear. Or even before that, they have people cutting themselves. Because, the cutting, the person is not crazy, like they don't want to cut themselves. It's the pain is so much internally, they're not in the stage that they want to suicide or commit suicide. And suicide is not a verb for some reason, I don't know why. So, and then, because the pain is unbearable, so they want to release the pain, they want to hurt the skin and the flesh, so they don't feel the pain so intensely. So they're very intense experiences, and there are not enough resources in our society to engage with that.
Yeah, and we're scared to talk about it. And people are even scared to say that they're feeling it, because then they think they're going to get locked up, know? So, and that's why I want to talk about it, because, it is true that our thoughts are incredibly powerful, and that a lot of our experience happens in the unseen world, in our consciousness. And what you're talking about, and the practices that I'm doing and engaging with, becoming aware of this place within me, within my being, is instead of trying to deny or push it down, which makes it bigger, you turn around and you face it, basically. And when you face it with love, and that's like the feeding of the body, it's like, this is your own love. If you would give your own body to it.
Yeah. But it might not feel like, sorry,
might not feel like love.
It might not feel like love when you're doing it.
Right.
Because it's not like the minute it is the first, like what I say sometimes, the first act of love is to be willing to have even a fight with the part of you that you dislike or you don't like. It doesn't feel like love at that moment. So at some point, you can be lovingly offering your body, but the first steps of the practice is like you scare shitless when you do it. Pardon my language, but it becomes very scary when you face the real dark inside of us.
Oh yeah, it's been very scary. And what is interesting is that when you do face it and you're having those emotions, you're discharging them. So, great movie that, you know, sort of simply shows us what's happening. It's called emotion. It's just all of our emotions are energy in motion. And I'm coming to this belief and this understanding of my physical body being basically an energy processing vehicle. And my emotions and my experiences are all sort of being processed through this system, and my mind and my thoughts are part of that system. So what I love about spiritual practices and what they've done for me over the last 20 years is they've given me an anchor, sort of a way to be in with the inner landscape, and a way to now my relationship with the inner landscape is changing. It's evolving. I'm gaining some mastery there by facing these darker places. And even there's part of facing these darker places is being like, oh my God, I'm scared to even talk about it. Now I'm going to talk about it publicly. So that's the next level of feeding your demon.
Yes. Well, yes. Yeah. I mean, it's not a laughing matter, but it's like a huge change when you're still scared, but you're not as scared not to even contemplate on doing it.
Right.
You know, so it means that your relationship with the fear has changed. You know, it's not controlling you so much. It's not controlling who you are. And we're talking about the personal now, but there is also the thing that goes beyond the personal. That's the transpersonal word, but it's like we have a collective consciousness that goes under a crisis right now, and very few people can deny that they can see a crisis in our consciousness. And we have been through different kind of crises before, but so there's a collective processing, because your experience is not just your experience. It came from other people being involved in your experience. Okay, and these people had other people behind them, and these people had other people behind them, and something went through transgenerationally. Psychotherapy accepts this. I don't have to go to spiritual traditions. Psychotherapy can see patterns coming down in family trees. Sometimes they skip a generation and they appear again. You know, so what we're processing is a collective consciousness. We do the personal work, but the personal work reflects the collective, and we're not aware of it. And what we can actually manage at best is our own personal process. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget that we're not separate. We are not creators. We're co-creators of a reality.
Right.
So we're processing all our ancestors. As the ancestors that were there to bring me coffee, can be the ancestors that were there to bring you to pull a knife in front of me, you know? Yeah. So what if you manage to control what pushes you to threaten me with the knife and put the knife down, then you did the work not just for yourself, but it goes back because you resolved something that your ancestors couldn't resolve.
So it's like energy and motion is not just this life in this body, it's energy and motion through lineages. I think that's really powerful. And I can feel that. That's the magnitude. It feels like a lot of times more than I can handle, you know, and I you know, it's wonderful when other people involved sort of step in and start cleaning up their pieces. That's, you know, that's always helpful, but you can't.
It's always helpful, but we can't expect that.
We can't expect it, you know. And I'm talking a lot about love because through this experience, I'm learning in this lifetime about having a relationship with the force of love, and that, you know, that it's a misunderstanding to think that love belongs to our relationships with other people. Everyone is doing the best that they can based upon everything that came before in their consciousness, and based upon the tools that they have and the teachers they've had, and where they're at in their process of asking for help and receiving help. You know, I'm really dedicated to, you know, I embrace this entire experience as an embodied awakening. And, you know, it's been hard and is hard to let everything that I want to sort of burn away. Like I would rather be doing different things in my life right now. And I'm at a place where I just feel like my arms are up and I'm just straight with God and just saying, okay, you know, work through me. It burns, it hurts. I'm facing it, I'm being with it with the support of people like you, Theo. And I know that psychologically, one of the places that I found within myself, and I'm, I'm looking for these places so that I can meet them and transmute and become more whole. And also so that I can know myself. When you know yourself, then others can fully know you. And that's part of the process of integrating and becoming fully alive and more whole. But what I noticed was that when all my coping mechanisms were taken away, this whole survivor archetype, I think I've always had, but I just engaged hard at that 14-year-old, window that we talked about in the beginning. But, with being sick, when all those coping mechanisms to be able to do it all for myself, to generate for myself, to rise above, to deny, to create the life I wanted, when all that is taken away, that's when I hit this place of total flatline. That's when I hit the place of finding the misunderstanding in my consciousness, which is and was, or was up until now, that I'm not worthy unless I can fully take care of myself, that I can be the one generating everything that I need on my own, that I cannot be a burden to anyone else. Basically, I'm only worthy if I don't need help. That's a belief. That was a misunderstanding in my consciousness.
It's misunderstanding is a great word. It's a belief system that it's so embedded in us, for example, that we don't even dare to question it. We don't even think that we have the possibility of questioning it. It's just there as the ultimate truth written in stone.
Right.
And it's not, So a lot of the inner work is just, it's about that as well. It's like forgetting what we have been programmed and finding out what it actually is instead.
Right. And that's why, just in closing, we were going to talk for 20 minutes, but this always happens because, let's face it, this is a juicy topic. Like, we could talk forever, and we can talk again too. Hopefully people ask questions. I hope people engage in this and find that place within themselves where that misunderstanding is in the program, is in the system that may be working against them in their own health or their own abundance, the way that this has been working against me. That misunderstanding was passed down through lineages, and when I met suicide, when I met the place within me that was just straight up suicidal, not just having thoughts, I realized that part of me had this belief. I was no longer worthy of having a life because I couldn't help myself and I needed help from others. I could no longer be the survivor, the giver, the generator. Therefore, the only thing I could see from that perspective was I'm going to have to find a way to gracefully exit this life. Like, it wasn't violent, but I didn't think I had a choice.
But here, sorry, I'm interrupting, but this is exactly what needs to happen. You need to exit that life internally that believes that this is all you can be. And now that you cannot be that, there cannot be anything else. Like, you lose the form that you have, and there's not, it's like, okay, so there's nothing. Okay, if I'm not that, I'm nothing.
Right.
That's what needs to die. It asks you to die, because at this point, it's not functional anymore. You cannot just give. You need to be taught something else. You need to come in touch with another part of who you are.
Yeah.
So that's exactly, it needs an exit. And if we don't honor it, we're just creating more conflict, or we even kind of honor it in the wrong way, and we just kill ourselves. But you're not just that thing that you believe you are. That's the funny thing.
Yeah.
That's why I think we need, in our education, we need more tools to engage with the inner realms as well, what's happening inside us, because that informs how we're going to act afterwards.
Yep.
And it affects in a very real way our reality and what we choose to manifest, what we choose to focus our energy and our power to,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know how to close this. What you said, hopefully people will share this video, because it's not just about you, it's about the bigger issue. And right now that the whole humanity is like kind of shaky, and the old form asks for collapse, like it's not functioning anymore. So we're going to have more in a personal level. We're going to have more people feeling desperate, feeling with directionless, or even more suicidal ideation. Yeah. So people need to hear, because what we're saying here, it also helps reframe how we look at suicidal ideation.
And
And
how we talk with our friends about it, because we need to be able to, like, I'm lucky. I not only have you, but I have, my closest girlfriends. I can say, whoa, I just hit this deep, dark well in my consciousness. And let's have a real dialogue about this, so that it can't be the way it's been, where people are feeling it, then they're afraid to talk about it. Then when they do talk about it, they get hauled off and locked up and drugged. It's like, that doesn't help. It's
yeah,
not helping.
yeah. But connection with nature might help. Connection with
Yep.
friends. The friends, again, need to be friends that they have done a little bit of work with themselves, so they can sustain the desperation and the fear and whatever it will trigger in them. So they're not going to try to pull you out or do like a spasmodic reaction to what you say.
Right.
So definitely a very skilled therapist. And I wish people ask questions about this video so we can talk about more. And again, I was going to say again, definitely a skilled person, because you're not going to a lawyer when you want information about how your engine runs in your car. You're going to a mechanic. So there needs to be people like, and again, there are psychologists that don't have a spiritual understanding of things, and they can put everything down to pathology. There are spiritual people who have no idea about psychology, and they can throw you into completely the wrong dimension with aphorisms and stuff like that.
Right.
And there are people in your path that they will know how to help you create your container and process this.
Yeah, because meeting suicide is part of the embodied awakening, is what I want to say. Like, in my experience, it's like, oh, good, there you are. There you are.
It's going to become something different if you don't shed the old form. Right. Everybody wants to talk about the metaphor of the butterfly with the chrysalis leaving and opening the wings, but they're focusing on the opening of the wings. They're not focusing on the death of the poor chrysalis.
The death is real, people. The death is real.
It's real for the chrysalis. It's not like it sheds its skin, it dies and from within something. Or the phoenix. Everybody loves to talk about the phoenix rising. Yep. The phoenix rising is an outcome of the phoenix being willing to be burned into its ashes. And when that happens, the other thing will emerge. It doesn't have to be pushed. Like there is not enough honoring of process in our society, in our self-help modalities. People need to be using the wheel to steer into the process, like like you have the canoe in the river. You cannot go against you could try, but you're going to exhaust yourself. But you use the canoe just to manage to flow down, facilitate where the river wants to take you, which is back to the sea.
Right.
The river is never going to get lost.
Like, I'm using my will to make sure I'm talking to the right people. I'm not calling every friend. I have a few very skilled, deeply spiritual, they're healers in their own right, and then I have you. And I also have another woman who is like my mother archetype, that we also work somatically with this trauma.
But you don't discernment.
Yeah, discernment. And, I use my will to set up the team, like the banks of the river, and then I can move into the process.
Yeah. And the same metaphor, because I was more, you're right, well, you can use the metaphor in different ways, but I was focusing the metaphor in the inner landscape, which is what happens inside of us. It is like a river flowing. So then it's like, how much will we put to steer? And, first we have to listen, because it's not an actual river outside of us that you can see. So we have all these mindfulness practices. Oh, what is this? The observer. And what is this? Sitting with what is and observe. And these are the first tools. They're not the only tools of mindfulness, to start listening and seeing, okay, so this is how the river flows within me. And I don't like it right now because it's going through like a big drop. It's like, how do I steer? How do I try to spasmodically go reverse or try to hold on? It is my river. It has to take me through a drop now.
Yeah.
How do I drop without, I just can't handle this drop. I'm just rather jump off the window.
Right. Well, and I think I really want to mention that even really skilled healers and teachers, I'm just really present to Salma Zadora, I didn't know her personally. I met her twice, but she was close with friends, people who I hold dear. Um, and I think after she chose to take her life, one of the things I read was that she said she spent her entire life trying to not commit suicide. And that finally it just came to a place where she was just like, it was just, she could, like, there was nothing left to keep trying not to. So, and I can tell you that's how I felt in these last 2 weeks. And that's where, it went from realizing they were suicidal thoughts to realizing, oh no, I'm meeting suicide right now, because it feels like what I realize is I have been running from this. And as someone who has, had childhood trauma, and I'm hearing this is what happens for people who have had trauma in their childhood, in their 40s and in their later life. There's something that happens in the development of the brain. I'm going to do more research and we'll be talking to more experts about that, but there's something that happens for us that it's like, we may have survived and been able to create something amazing, but it has been so much work for us because of that trauma and the way that it affected the brain and the nervous system early on and the structure of it now. I've met that point, and I thought of Psalm and I just thought, wow, I wonder if this is how she felt, because there was a part of me that was like, well, maybe it's just time, I don't, yeah.
You said it how she felt.
Yeah.
She was, with your own words, she was trying to get away from it. Yeah. So only Peter Pan was able to run away from his shadow, and then again he had to find it again so he will grow. Mm-hmm. So that's the danger of this. Like it's so painful that the body's instinct want to fight or flight.
Right. And we don't, and survivors can build a lot of really amazing things with that fight or flight energy. Yes. But it does catch up. Yes. It does catch up.
Yeah.
And so this is really, I don't know why this is coming through. Again, it's not like she was a close personal friend, but talking about this publicly is really in service to in honor of her life and her battle as well. She did the best that she could, and she reached the point where she couldn't keep fighting. And so I'm meeting it, and I'm saying the same thing. I can't keep fighting, so something's got to give. So now we're doing it differently.
Yeah. So exactly, and that's the danger. It's a very good example, the one you. Although I don't want to talk about specific people,
right?
But it's a very good example because the person, when she was doing her work, she was thinking like, I'm doing the best I can. It's like, and yet it wasn't honoring what was coming through. And it's not a judgment, and I don't want in any way to but it's like we're not taught the right skills to engage. And the natural reaction to the brain will be survival, will be fight or flight or freeze, but it is the natural reptilian brain that takes over. She wants freedom from that.
Right. And when you can't fight anymore, then you feel like, okay, I'm at death's door now.
Yeah. I met her briefly, and I asked her if she wants to look at it in a different way. But the other thing is, like, when we have a set way of doing things, mm-hmm. It's like we get too much attached to our form.
Right.
And then it's the same thing. It's like what you say. It's like, oh, if I'm not that giver and that doer and manifestor, I'm nothing.
Yeah.
Who told you that? How do you know? How do you explore the form without this form? No. But that's how it feels, It generally feels like this. Yeah, nobody can deny that at that moment when you feel like that, it's like death. It's like, I want to be disappearing. I'm not worth of this. Yeah, of this, but maybe something else you are. But and we give names to ourselves since very young. You're this, and you're that, and you're a good student, and you're a good child, and you're a bad child. And then we live by the names. And then there's a Sufi saying that says, no matter what name you give to yourself, may you want to call yourself a goddess, or you want to call yourself a demon, or good or bad, or whatever you want to call yourself, clever or stupid or whatever. Whatever name you give to yourself, you're limiting yourself.
Mm.
So it's very interesting to allow, to find the way to explore what we are beyond the form that we think we are.
Yeah.
We're very complicated beings, that I can say for sure. What exactly we are, I have ideas, but I cannot say for sure.
Same here. This is a miracle. The body's a miracle. The deeper I go into the process of becoming whole, the more in awe I am, and you know, and humble servant of this process. So, if you or anyone you know has come to a place where you are meeting suicide, I invite you to engage with it as a gateway to the truth of who you are, to an embodied awakening, to an evolution into a super experience of your humanness that will serve humanity. You know, lean in. I'll give you Theo's contact info and other people I've worked with, and you know, I'm just saying, like, let's just meet suicide in any way that it shows up, from a little thought to a deep-seated feeling, with curiosity and with love, and with a lot of compassion. You know, may we first be kind to ourselves. May we pour the love through our bodies into that part of ourselves, and you know, may we just continue to help each other on this path of becoming whole. Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you for helping me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for trusting me, Heather. And also, it's like that, because once you go through it, then you can walk with someone else the path.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing. Then it's like a candle that you lit. We have the Easter tradition here in Greece. We light they bring the flame from Jerusalem, and then the priest at midnight on Saturday will start to light all the candles. And in the beginning, like, he gives the light to a few candles, and then these candles give to more. And in the beginning, the process is slow, and then it's the whole church lights up, but really fast after. So hopefully that's what we're trying to do. Is like we're working with ourselves, and we work as a collective consciousness as well. It's a good frame to remember that we're not just working for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And also another thing that I remember, one of my teachers told me when I was in a very desperate situation when I was younger, out of a broken heart this time, not of something else. And he told me, if you find yourself at any point that you seriously contemplate of your life is worthless, please offer your life to someone that needs you. Go to volunteer to a place that has children, or Down syndrome children, or whatever volunteer place you can find, and offer yourself to help others. If you don't have any use of yourself, you can do that. And it's really powerful what that can do as well.
And that's why I'm doing this. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm offering this darkness because I don't have a lot of energy, but thankfully I still have my voice. Yes. So I'm using my voice, and that's a beautiful, the candles passing the light. That's very much what I envision when I speak of the path of the light. I have many path of the light practices. It's also the visual that I have for the network of love, and for the way that we together becoming compassion ambassadors, and we then become the path of the light in a network of love for the healing of humanity. So. Amen. Thank you.
Maybe we'll save ourselves. Who knows?
Maybe we will. Let's at least, we'll have fun doing it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.